I think it is time for our interview with our special guests. Now, unfortunately, folks, this was pre-recorded. They are from University of Edinburgh, so the time change, it's a little difficult to coordinate all of this. So we pre-recorded this segment. I hope you enjoy it. They're a friend of mine from graduate school that does cultural astronomy, and you'll get to hear more about what that's all about and what they've been doing. So I hope you enjoy. All Space Considered is thrilled today to have a very special guest with us. We have Dr. Jarita Holbrook, the Marie Curie Restart Fellow at University of Edinburgh. And Jarita and I go way back to graduate school at UC Santa Cruz, but I'm extra thrilled to have you today as our guest because you're a real expert in cultural astronomy, and how astronomy connects to actual people, which is what we do here at Griffith Observatory. We try and inspire people to observe the heavens and look into it, whereas you are an expert on how people have done this throughout history and how they're doing it today. So welcome to All Space Considered. I'm just excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thanks for having me. So I guess I'll start by talking about being from Los Angeles, because if I remember, you're from Los Angeles too.
Yeah, well, my family, I was born down in this area, and then my family moved me up to Reno, Nevada when I was about 3, but I've been in LA more of my life now than any other location. So I do consider myself a Los Angelino. Were you born down here in LA area? No. So, but you were raised down here for a while, I do know.
I was born in Hawaii, actually, but
Oh,
I spent my formative years in San Bernardino and then moved to Los Angeles for junior high school, and then university. So I went to, for this is for all you LA people. So I went to John Burroughs Junior High, and then I went to Fairfax High School, and Griffith Observatory was just a staple in my life, growing up so close, not that far from Griffith Observatory. Well, it was one bus ride away. It was a long bus ride, but it was up through, Sunset Boulevard and then out to the Griffith Observatory. So we used to go there, as teenagers, run around there at night, looking for trouble. During the day, going in, seeing the science exhibits. I'll never forget the pendulum that's in the foyer. Is that still there?
it is. Our Foku pendulum is certainly one of the highlights of most people's visits. And it's one of my favorites. Just even on a day we're close to the public, sometimes I'll go up into that gallery and just spend some time with our beautiful pendulum.
Yeah. So I have really lots of fond memories of going to Griffith Observatory. Before you move away from that, we have to, honor Frank Drake, who died a couple of weeks ago. So,
Yeah.
he was a beloved professor of mine.
Yeah, Frank was truly a good person. In addition to being a fantastic astronomer, um, he was one of the good people, and everybody seems to say that, and which is just more proof that it was true. He wasn't, somebody that was nice to some people and then, a horrible person in other ways. No, Frank was truly a lovely individual. He was great to his family. He was great for Santa Cruz. He was great for the university. He treated students with respect and care, and he'll be missed. He really will be. And folks, we're talking about Frank Drake of the famous Drake equation that was a way to estimate the number of civilizations we could communicate with, intelligences that had developed the ability to communicate with radio. And this is a famous equation that you'll see all sorts of places. And he was friends with Carl Sagan, and some of the inspiration for things like the movie Contact, and the idea that we could use the big radio dishes to go out and listen to stars, listen in terms of radio, pick up signals. He was the first one with Project Osmo to go out and point a dish at a star and say, and I think it was Tau Ceti was his first star he looked at, if I remember correctly, but he kind of kicked all of that off. And some folks will say, well, we haven't picked up anything, it was a failure. I liken it to saying, well, I've lost my keys in my apartment, and after searching the kitchen, I've claimed the keys are nowhere to be found, because in reality, we've kind of searched the kitchen of our apartment that we're living in, and there's a whole lot of other areas to look for it. So I agree, celebrating Frank is a good thing. And inspiration to us all.
So the other thing about Frank was he didn't stand on ceremony. So he was like the Frank Drake. He was that famous even when we were students, right? But he was always very generous with his time. And he really did take the time to nurture young people, to inspire them to continue to do what they love to do, and say that there was a place for them, wherever they wanted to be, that there was a possibility that they could be there, whether that be working for NASA, working for an observatory, becoming a professor. He was very, very generous and very supportive that way.
Now, I know that you have had a career that some folks would consider somewhat non-traditional for someone that was interested in astronomy, but I think that it's perhaps some of the most important work that's being done in astronomy, because what is astronomy without the connection to culture and to people? To me, it's meaningless unless we look into and think about how people worldwide are connecting with the sky and the heavens and the work that we're doing. So tell us a little bit about your work and your connection and what you find inspiring these days.
Thank you. Again, thank you for your kind words. So, yeah, I stay busy. Commenting first about the non-traditional aspect of my career. If you can't do what you want to do, what's the point? Really, really. And I think I've been very fortunate for most of my adult life, been able to do what I want to do. There was a weatherman, and I've spoken about this in just one other article. There was a weatherman in Los Angeles called George Fishback, right? And in junior high, he gave a talk at the Natural History Museum by USC, and I think there was 5 students from every science class were allowed to go. So it was by lottery, and I won, right? And he explained science in a way that was so engaging. I mean, I was already on track to be a scientist. Don't get that wrong, but he was so engaging about how sometimes science just never goes the way that it's supposed to go. Like you're looking for X and instead you get Y. But hey, Y is very useful. And then the other thing that he emphasized was you have to take risks, right? That you're never going to get anywhere if you are risk averse. You have to be able to intellectually take risks. And so I was like sold from that lecture, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take risks, and science is gonna be fun and fine, because even if I'm looking for A, I may get B, and B might be still really important, right? So I never thought of this. You're on this track, and you're attached to this one hypothesis, and that's it. That hypothesis, if you don't get that hypothesis correct, if you don't prove it, your life is a failure, right? I never subscribed to that, right? From junior high forward. So I'm not averse to taking risks, and I know that science itself can be rewarding even if it isn't in the direction you thought it was going to be.
So how have you applied the notion of taking risks into your own research? What have you been up to, and what can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I think that like every step of the way, like as soon as I said, I'm going to go over here, like here I am an astrophysicist, I'm going to start studying cultural astronomy, right? I think that was the first big risk, right? And I think that what horrified most people is that I had in my hand what every academic desires. I had a tenure track faculty position in my hand, and I let it go, right? And I said, no, I want to do something different, because I knew that in order to make that transition into this different field, it needed all my brain cells. And if I had joined the faculty at that time, I would have been teaching and, writing grants, and it would have been much harder for me to transition into cultural astronomy. It would have been easier for me to stay as an astrophysicist because, writing grants, you have to write about what you know and the data that's in your hand. So that was the very first risk, was to turn down that coveted position and go for what I wanted. So I went to being a postdoc. And so then I thought, being, after honing your brain for quantitative research for so long, I thought the easiest thing to study was something that was equally quantitative in indigenous cultures, which was navigation by the stars, right? So, what did I know about navigation by the stars before I started that research? Nothing, 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 nothing. So I had to learn the night sky better because I needed to go out into local communities, and when they pointed at something, I had to know what it was. And this is revealing one of the dirty secrets of astrophysics education. They don't teach you the night sky. You either learn that in high school. I learned a lot of it in high school. I was a summer student at Cal State LA, and I took astronomy, and we had to learn the night sky. And I had won a computer contest by creating a astronomy constellation identification program written in BASIC, right, on a teletype machine, which shows you how old we are, right? A teletype machine where you dial in, beep. So I had won the Rockwell science competition, and I actually was the only girl that won. So I'd learned a lot about the night sky and constellations in high school. But, formal education in astronomy, constellation identification and the names are just not part of the curriculum. So a lot of astronomers actually cannot pick out constellations or stars in the night sky. And especially given that the sky changes over the year, they really can't. I mean, it's a shameful truth, but they oftentimes don't know winter from summer, from spring or fall constellations.
Yeah. So where did you connect with this guy, and where did you learn more about it? If you found you needed to reconnect with it to delve into cultural astronomy, how did you do that?
So there are various night sky programs. There's books, there's like reproductions of Bayer's beautiful constellations. So I just spent a lot of time outside at night. During the day, looking at star charts, and I had planispheres, and I had planispheres for different latitudes, and dialing it, figuring out what's up in the night sky, and then just looking at the night sky and just trying to correlate what I could see. So being from Los Angeles, the night sky was always polluted, but you could always see the brightest stars, which made stargazing really easy. Like I could always see, Ursa Major and Orion, sometimes Scorpio, but that's only because it's south, right? So it's easier to stargaze in light polluted situations because only the brightest stars are visible. So even in Los Angeles, you can learn the constellations because the constellations are based around the brightest stars. So that's how I learned it. Going back over Sky and Telescope magazines, another way of doing it. Strangely, maybe not so strange, when I was a master's student. I was a master's student at San Diego State University in San Diego, and we had a planetarium, and we had to do shows. We had to we had slides of images, and then we'd have to show them where it was in the sky. So this is the Horsehead Nebula. Here it is. You can't see it because, it's not visible in a planetarium, but that's where it would be. And here's Alberio, and here's, Vega, and so I could point out certain things in the sky, so I wasn't completely ignorant. And that was in a planetarium. We had a planetarium in our department, which at Santa Cruz we didn't, as far as I know. I don't think we had a planetarium.
No,
Yeah.
but this
and that was for public. That was for engaging with the public.
Yeah, well, this somewhat explains your interest in cultural astronomy. But to folks out there, a lot of people don't understand what that is, and they'll think there's just this idea of astronomy. So how would you tell somebody what cultural astronomy is, assuming they know nothing about it?
Cultural astronomy, you need two things. Okay, you need the people and you need the sky, right? So it's a study of people and the sky. If you have just the sky, that's astronomy, astrophysics, right? If you have just people, that's anthropology, sociology. But people in the sky makes it cultural astronomy is the term that we use now, which is about from the late 80s. It used to be called archaeoastronomy. Also in anthropology, it's called ethnoastronomy, history of astronomy, right? So history of people and the sky, the connection between people and the sky, how people view the sky, how they change their ideas about the sky, right? But the people is the main part, is people and their engagement and their understandings and their use, and their thoughts about the sky. So that's cultural astronomy. It's very, very broad.
To me, I feel like you've pointed out astronomy as one thing on its own, and I suppose it is in terms of thinking about it being raw data or the raw physics of what's going on there. But it's always going to be people that engage with that, and I think that's where the inspiration comes in and where the enrichment into our lives comes in. But I come at it from a very Western perspective. I only have my own perspective on it, whereas I know you've spent time looking at it in a more global perspective. So how does that differ? Are there differences in how cultures connect with the astronomy and cultural astronomy, and what similarities are there in how we look at it as well?
So, of course, the similarities are we're all under the same sky, right? So we're looking at the same stars and planets, sun and moon, but it's all in their interpretation and your location.
Yeah, okay.
So as you move further north, you have stars that don't set. You have the circumpolar stars. So their astronomy, cosmology is going to be different from someone who lives in the tropic where everything moves. Everything goes up and down, east to west, east to west, east to west. And so they don't have this idea of a fixed star because those fixed stars are too low on the horizon. So the way they think about the sky and engage with the sky is different. So if we go back to the polar regions, you have the situation where the sun and the moon never pass overhead. Never. Right? Because they only pass overhead in the tropics. And the same with the planets. They only pass overhead in the tropics. So if you're living in the tropics, then the planets and the sun and the moon will at some point pass overhead. And that means your relationship to those bodies is going to be different. And then you have the way that it's entwined with agriculture, living on different parts of the earth, of course. You're going to have different sun, different weather patterns, etc. And so they correlate things in the sky with weather. Some of them is not correlation. Some of them are causation. So for example, what we call scintillation, which is how the stars dance and twinkle. If they dance and twinkle more, that means more turbulence in the atmosphere, which means that there's going to be a change of weather. If you have rings around the moon and rings around the sun and moon dogs, that means that there's ice particles in the upper atmosphere, which also indicates like weather is going to change. So those are causal, right? There's moisture, extra ice in the sky, which is causing these effects around the sun, moon, and the way the stars dance, etc., etc. Those are causal, but there's other things that are just correlated, right? So, for example, with the moon, and I'll give a better example. The moon is kind of an obvious one with correlation, but there's another correlation, which is the Pleiades. So the Pleiades is used for weather and seasonal, as a seasonal marker, like all over the world. People are looking for the Pleiades, and they usually use it as a marker for rain, right? Both in the northern and or southern hemisphere, they use it for rain. And you would think, okay, they can't use it for rain in the northern and the southern hemisphere. But the point is that they use it differently, right? They're looking for the Pleiades, but they're using it differently. So I'm just going to give examples that are not correct. I'm just talking about how they use it. Okay. I'm not saying that this is exactly how they use it. But for example, if it's in the northern hemisphere and we have spring rains, right? The Pleiades leave the night sky in the northern hemisphere kind of like April-ish, around the equinox. They kind of leave the sky. So they would use the Pleiades leaving the sky as a marker for rain, right? And then like in the southern hemisphere, rain is, 6 months later. Their spring rain is 6 months later. So they would use the return of the Pleiades to the night sky as a marker of rain. And then in other places in between, they may use, okay, if you're facing east at midnight and you see the Pleiades, this is when rain is coming, right? So they're using it at different times of the year, watching for the Pleiades doing different things that they have noticed correlates with the beginning or the end of the rainy season.
Okay, that completely makes sense, and that's interesting. But the commonality of the Pleiades between the two cultures is sort of the connection in the
Many
sky,
cultures.
but the usage, many cultures, but it's the connection with that part of the sky, but using it in different ways that applies to them.
Then taking it further, in Africa, along the eastern trade route, and sometimes in Central Africa, it all has derived from the same name. It's Isimili, which is the digging stars, right? So it has to do with cultivation. So it's Samila, Isimila, Ilimila, it's all derived, like, depending where you are in Africa, it's almost the same name, and it all has to do basically with cultivation, the digging stars. So I thought you could hear that.
What are the biggest differences in how people connect with the sky that you've seen between two different cultures, anywhere on Earth, obviously, but
Yeah, so I've learned lately about some of the Navajo mega constellations, and mainly through the work of Nancy Maryboy and David Begay. And so these mega constellations, where a constellation is not completely visible until the end of a season. Like it's never completely in the sky. It's like this star rising this month, and then the next star rising the next, and the next, where it's a mega constellation. So that I haven't heard very many of these mega constellations where the constellation extends beyond the visible sky. Right. So that I think is really, really different. The other thing is just, how I like to look at Orion, because Orion is one of my favorite constellations. It looks like a hunter, right? It looks like a hunter. And this gets to, I was meant to tell two Orion stories. But before I do that, let me talk about storytelling. And then I'll get to the Orion stories. Okay, so storytelling. So a lot of cultures do not have writing, right? Did not have writing, or writing that we can recognize. Our brains are actually wired to understand stories. So if you have complex information, if you tell it as a story, we'll remember it better than if you tell it to us as facts or not in this story format. And storytelling is an indigenous way of conveying knowledge, but also an ancient way of conveying knowledge. So it's very important. And of course, informal education, like going to school and getting your degree in physics, they don't make use of the fact that our brains are wired to understand stories. And so we should be telling stories about physics equations as opposed to just giving you numbers. Like the numbers can be part of the story, but it'll be received better as part of a story. So storytelling is this ancient form, and it's a indigenous form of conveying knowledge. And it's a way of preserving knowledge across generations. Knowledge of your lineage, like, I was born here and the family migrated from here to there, that kind of lineage, but also important knowledge to your survival, like don't eat that plant, right? Don't eat that animal. This is
Yeah.
how you cultivate that plant. And this is, like, especially in settlements. So one of my professors at Caltech, I did some anthropology classes, and what they discovered was that they were interested in foodways, right? So that when you have a nomadic population, one that moves around, their diet is actually less diverse because they're moving to get to their favorite foods, right? Whereas if you have a population that's settled, their diet is more diverse because they have to be ready for when a crop fails, right? So they tended to know more plants and more things that were edible, but also their foodways were more complicated as a result. So they learned things like these beans grow here, but we only are going to eat them during a drought because you have to pick them, and then you have to like boil them, then you have to like soak them in urine, and then you have to like, sit them under the moon, and then they're edible, right? So it's just harder to eat certain things. And so, but so that kind of complicated knowledge, like that can be eaten, but only through this complicated process, is conveyed generation to generation through storytelling, right? Okay, so that is prefacing the two stories that I'm going to tell. All right, both of them are about Orion, and one is from the northern hemisphere and one is from the southern hemisphere. Okay, so Orion, the Greek story of Orion and the Pleiades is that, Orion's this, he's this dude. And so he sees the Pleiades, who are Atlas's daughters, right? I think they're Atlas's daughters. The Pleiades, who are beautiful and accomplished, and, and they're like, Orion is a rube. We want nothing to do with Orion. So they're like running, and Orion is like chasing the Pleiades. And he gets one Pleiad. It's, I think it's Pleione is the one. All the Pleiades have names. Each one of Atlas's daughter has a name. And so he captures one of them. And, the heavens go crazy, everything, it's all bad, and Orion gets killed. It's all drama, 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 drama. But the point is that when the Pleiades are about to set, like every couple of years, the planet Venus is over there with them, right? When they're setting. This is in like April. And then as time goes on, like as the days go on, the Pleiades go and Venus approaches Orion, right? So it's kind of like the sky is enacting this story about how Orion captures one of the Pleiades, right? But the Pleiades is not a Pleiade, it's actually Venus. Now, I found out, because I had a visitor last week, Dwayne Hamaker, who's an expert on Australian Aboriginal sky knowledge, that they say that the missing Pleiad is actually Jupiter. And so I need to go to Stellarium to see if it also happens with Jupiter. When is Jupiter near the Pleiades? And night after night, when does it make that dance towards Orion? Okay, so that's the Greek. Now, let's go to the hopeless hunter in the southern hemisphere. So the hopeless hunter is the story of the Pleiades are like all the wives of this hunter. Yeah, it's polygamous. So the hunter is actually Aldebaran, right? So the red star in the face of the bull. And he is sent out, and his wives are all like, now, don't come back here if you don't bring some meat, right? We don't want to hear it. You're a hunter. You need to go out and get some meat. But we don't want to see you unless you can bring us back some meat. So he goes out and he sees a herd of, and since I lived in South Africa, they say zebra, right? Not zebra, that's the American zebra. So, and what are the zebra? They are the belt of Orion. Like that's the herd of zebra. So, the hopeless hunter, right? He goes on over to the zebra and he pulls back his one arrow and he shoots it and he misses. And so that arrow is the sword of Orion, right? So he has missed. And then he wants to go get his arrow because we know he's a hopeless hunter because he has one arrow, right? This was doomed from the start. Doomed from the start. And, but lo and behold, he sees, I think it's Bellatrix. So, and that's a lion. So he cannot go and get his arrow until the lion disappears. So you have, there's two reddish stars in Orion. One is Bellatrix and the other is Betelgeuse.
Betelgeuse, yeah.
So they're connecting these red stars. So Aldebaran gets transferred to Betelgeuse, which is the armpit of Orion in Greek, but is now, like the foot, because now Orion is upside down. And then the other red star, Bellatrix, becomes the lion. So he's stuck. He can't go home because his wives are like, don't come home. Don't come without any meat. So this is the two stories of Orion. The thing that they have in common is that their association with hunting, right? Because Orion is hunting women and the hopeless hunter is hunting zebra. The fact that the Pleiades are women, right? Those are the things that they have in common. But you see, the whole complex is really different. Hunting is a different way. Like you have in the Greek myth, the entire constellation is the hunter. Whereas in the South African myth, this is South African, it's like a Khoisan San myth. So a lot of the people who have the click languages, this is one of their stories. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that fun?
Yeah, that's super fun. I greatly appreciate thinking of the individual stars as the characters. Somehow I find that to be a romantic idea, to look up in the sky and be able to tell stories of, this star over here is off doing this, and meanwhile here are the wives. That's a different way to look at things, and I find it really neat, really, really interesting and special. Well, to wrap up here on just a couple of things, because you have so many different skills. You're also a filmmaker, and in fact, you're a trained filmmaker in this. I've heard that you actually have taken a year of studies to do this, and you have your own YouTube channel, and you've been doing travel, 2 YouTube channels, your Cultural Astronomy one, and you're also your travel based
Science Tourist,
Science Tourist
channel,
which maybe we'll have you back just to talk about your science tourism sometime and focus in on that. But I just want to let folks know that they can connect with our wonderful guest through the media you've created. You even have an award-winning film, and you're the writer and star of Black Suns. And I can't seem to find a place where I can go see that. Do we need to invite you and pay you to show the film at Griffith Observatory if I can arrange that for our foundation somehow. How can folks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the story of Black Suns. First of all, I have two award-winning films, and one
Okay.
episode of the Science Tourist is award-winning, right? So I
Okay.
have
Well,
three
you're
award-winning projects, right? Yeah. So the first one was Hubble's Diverse Universe, which was available for a long time on Amazon. You could just buy the DVD on Amazon, but they recently stopped doing their video on demand,
mm,
printing of CDs. So I've been basically, if somebody wants to purchase it, then I send them, they purchase it from me, and then I give them the file. And that one we were only charging like $10 for that, right? Because at this point it's kind of an old film, but it's dedicated to the Hubble Space Telescope, which at the time in 2009 I think was like 20 years old. Now, Hubble's so old now. It's still beautiful. It still does great work, but it's quite old now. And then so Black Suns, you can actually see it on Vimeo for less than $1. You can just
okay.
watch it on Vimeo. It's, Vimeo/Black Suns documentary, something like that. We do have
Yeah.
an IMAX version of it. We
Okay.
showed
Well,
the IMAX version in the planetarium at the Air and Space Museum.
again, I just want to thank you so much for joining us for this conversation to hear about what you're up to, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. So we're going to have to find a way to connect with you again. But thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. We're just trying to inspire people to connect with astronomy, and your story is an interesting one. And thank you for sharing it. It's amazing, and I feel privileged to know you. I really do. Seeing you doing what you want to be doing and doing it in a manner that is meaningful and important to the world, frankly, I just think is awesome.